I'm Ferki Ferrati. I'm the president of the Jefferson Educational Society. They insist that once in a while I got to come up and make an appearance. So here I am. If you're not done learning and want to continue your learning this weekend, the Model UN will be happening here at Gannon University. And if you've not been a part of that, it's quite an experience. Let's see what we clearly can't talk to each other, right? So let's see what our kids are doing. I hope you all show up to that. With that, I'll begin. Welcome to Global Summit number 8 of 14. We're halfway there, or a little bit more than halfway there. So this is great to have all of you here tonight. Everybody looks happy. What happened last night? Huh? Nobody wants to talk about it? Yeah, me neither. I do know that one thing, though. Since really 2016, I've seen this thing that really bothered me about the conversations around this country, which was, are our elections fair? So you had all that Russian collusion, and the things got really out of hand in 2020, right? For the first time, it feels like most American people are like, we had an election, the elections worked, and there was folks who conceded elections. So that is, I think, one of the under-talked about things that are important on a republic or a democracy. It's folks' ability to concede elections. The Romans couldn't do this. We remember Pompey and Caesar and Augustus, and even before them, like Marius. They lost elections, and then they said, we didn't lose them. So at least we're back on track of conceding election, because that is not a way to run a republic, and it is not a way to run a democracy. So, to learn more about what happened yesterday, I can't make heads or tails of it, but show up next week. We have 4 folks who do this for a living in Washington, D.C. We have David Urban and Chris Matthews and Steve Scully and Tara. Yes. I have some English lessons to take later. But anyways, house rules at the Jefferson are always, there's going to be a pencil and index card that was given to you. If you have questions, write them down. As Ben says, penmanship is important, and we'll send somebody to collect them. Shut off your phones so that we don't interrupt the program. You can take pictures, though. We encourage that. Many thanks to give tonight. I do want to recognize one special person here, Mary Ellen Dahlkemper. Yes, you, who is, I always tell folks that the way we get speakers at the Jefferson, because we can't afford to pay the high prices, is we find some people that know some people that know some people. And 2 years ago, that was Mary Ellen Dahlkemper and Ed Lesser. One day they just came to me and said, you know, our son is in charge of Boston Consultant Group. And I'm like, you mean the Boston Consultant Group? She goes like, yeah. So we had the chairman of Boston Consultant Group last year and their son, and after he left, then we started bothering him about more people from Boston Consultant Group. So all roads lead to Mary Ellen Dahlkemper. Thank you, Mary Ellen. I do want to thank Gannon. They are a wonderful host. Why build your own theaters when you can go and use somebody else's? So it's just such a wonderful partnership. We bring the speakers and the community, and they bring the students, and then we have this intergenerational learning happening here at Gannon with the Jefferson Society. So thank you, Gannon. And of course, all of our sponsors, including tonight's sponsor, Erie Insurance. We wouldn't be able to do this without them. And let's give them a round of applause, all of our sponsors. And now I'm going to get out of the stage and turn it over to Dr. Sarah Ewing, the provost at Gannon University.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Fergie, for that introduction. As he said, my name is Dr. Sarah Ewing, and I'm the Provost and Vice President for Student Experience here at Gannon. And on behalf of our Gannon community, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We are truly grateful for the partnership with the Jefferson Educational Society and the opportunity to once again host the Global Summit Speaker Series here on our campus. Thanks to this partnership, many of our students, faculty, and staff can attend these lectures and actively engage with the programs and workshops that take place during the summit. These events are incredibly valuable to their educational and professional development, now probably more importantly than ever. At Gannon, we are committed to cultivating an environment where our students can gain broader insight on important issues at the community, state, federal, and global levels that affect us all. We're honored to partner with the Jefferson Educational Society to provide this opportunity to do just that for our Gannon community and our broader Erie community. As we navigate these challenging issues, we turn to the leaders around us to provide support and guidance. We strive to ensure that our students at Gannon receive an education that equips them with the skills, the knowledge, and experience that is needed to lead with empathy and compassion. I'm excited to be here tonight with all of you to continue to grow as connected, inclusive, and generous leaders. It is my pleasure now to introduce Christine Goodrich-Blayshak, Chief Diversity and Community Development Officer at Erie Insurance, who's going to introduce our speaker for this evening. Christine.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Good evening, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. Congratulations to the entire Jefferson team on another successful year at Global Summit. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Christy Blayshak. I'm the Chief Diversity and Community Development Officer with Erie Insurance. H.O. Hurt, along with O.G. Crawford, founded Erie Insurance nearly 100 years ago with the belief that focusing on the human touch and the golden rule would set us apart from our competitors. And they were right. These basic beliefs have paved the way for us to be, above all, in service, not only to our policyholders and employees, but to our communities as well. Creating a culture of connections, like Joe Davis recommends, is critical to the success of our organization. I'll give you a quick example. Our formal Erie Coaching Network helps us to connect nearly 50 volunteer leaders throughout the organization with employees who are interested in expanding their careers through mentorship. Spending time one-on-one to understand the strengths and goals of each individual helps build long-term success for the employee, the coach, as well as the organization. As I'm sure Mr. Davis will share, doing this through an inclusive and equitable lens ensures that everyone has a seat at the table, and that's certainly a goal we should all embrace. Joe Davis is a managing director and senior partner at Boston Consulting Group. In his book, The Generous Leader, Joe shares a performance review. He was told he was not the best at problem-solving solo, but with others, he could tackle any challenge. His manager identified his key strength. He was a person who could connect. That's exactly what you'll see Joe Davis do tonight, connect with this audience. For over 35 years, Joe has been with BCG, where he co-founded the Washington, D.C. office, led office systems, started BCG's public sector business, and led BCG North America. He's a chairman of BCG's Center for Inclusion and Equity, and a co-founding steering committee member of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, of which Erie Insurance is a signatory. Joe earned his BA from Whitman College, where he currently serves as board chairman, and his MBA from Harvard Business School. His mantra is crystal clear: there is no more powerful leader than a generous leader. Please join me in giving a Jefferson Global Summit welcome to Joe Davis.
Thank you for the introduction. That was wonderful. You did leave out one part I find very important. I have 4 children and 8 grandchildren, and I'm very proud of that. Thank you all for being here. Let me just get going. Imagine a gorgeous business conference room, way up, in a building, in an office with the view of the city that doesn't quit, as far as you can see. There's 9 power players in the room. They're sitting around a table, deciding on the fate of today's group of young applicants to one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the world. A position with this firm is something they've been working hard towards through years of college, business school, internships, study, etc., what feels like endless apprenticeship. For them, this is a moment of life or death, and it's a moment of life or death they've been shooting for, this job. So reviewing the candidates, the first candidate comes up. Strong interview scores, very good grades, great resume, she's in. The next person, average on every metric, average, just not quite, it's a no. The third candidate steps, they will start to review the third candidate. That person knocked it out of the park on all the interviews. 3 interviews, all the criteria, just aced it. Top scores across the chart. But then someone says, wait a minute, this candidate has a mid 2.0 GPA. We know that just doesn't cut it here. That's not a grade point that actually lasts. The conversation goes back and forth, it gets a bit heated, and the mood starts to swing to no. But then a man who's been biding his time, staying silent, speaks up. So I have to tell you all something, and this is not me, by the way. I have to tell you all something that I've never told anyone at this firm. I had those grades in college. You know, what can I say? I wasn't focused. I goofed around. But I figured it out, got into business school, got hired here, became senior partner, and now I'm head of this office. What do you say we give this young person a chance also? You know, that conversation probably would never have taken place even 10 years ago. I mean, the story is lovely, but what's really interesting about the story is it didn't really matter whatsoever to that executive if this young man was hired. There were plenty of candidates. So why would he make this vulnerable admission to save a mere stranger? Because that's what it means to be generous in the moment, to take each and every opportunity to help others to thrive at their fullest potential, even when you personally have nothing to gain. What a leader is and what is demanded of them, I deeply believe, have changed. We need a new kind of leadership. We need generous leaders, those who give of themselves freely without expectation of direct personal benefit so that others can develop, grow, and thrive at their full potential. And that's what I want to talk a little bit more about today. The demands on leaders have changed deeply, and the times are calling for a new kind of leader. You know, the days of Jack Welch, and not to pick on Jack, but Neutron Jack, CEO of General Electric, they're gone, and they're just not coming back. Jack radiated toughness. He demanded the best. He evaluated everyone yearly, ranked them, and they fired the bottom 10%. And GE justified this behavior on the basis of meritocracy. But unfortunately, where is GE now? It was only a handful of years later that Jeff Immelt began to have to dismantle the house that Jack built. Was the meritocracy a myth? But it's not just GE. The old corporate model of humanity fitting into repetitive jobs like cogs in a wheel. Think IBM, which is an exceptional company, many years ago, mostly white, mostly male, white shirt, blue suit. That model has gone too. People expect different. Now we need a different kind of leadership. Fran Katsoudas, who's the executive vice president at Cisco, the tech company, she told me a story. She said a leader pulled her aside when she started her career 20 or 30 years ago. Fran said, "Fran, you do not have enough killer instinct. Do not care as much. You would do well to put some of that away." As Fran said to me, I did not follow that advice. It was not authentic to me. She also noted it did not work out so well for that leader, and she does not believe it would work for today's leaders at all. Fran will make tough decisions. She will engage in intense issues. She will strive and push her teams to move fast. But as she said, I will always strive to do so with respect and caring. Now, what's happened? I believe technology began the process. The BlackBerry, some of us probably remember the BlackBerry. Raise your hand if you're old enough to remember. It took over our lives. You now could get message 24/7, 365. The worker with his or her BlackBerry attached to their waist, pinging at the ball game or at the barbecue, and just became the new normal. And it was at that time, you might have cursed them a bit, but they made you feel really important. Now, the mobile phone is ubiquitous. It makes us feel connected. Actually, it forces connection. It forces always on, but also isolated at the same time. Then, of course, the pandemic finished the process. How many times have you met with someone from your kitchen while they're in their living room or your bedroom office and their kitchen, et cetera? It's now become blurred. And we now have the dubious distinction of feeling like the most isolated generation of humans who have ever lived, with the alarming mental health indicators to prove it, who can never disconnect from the insistent demands of our phones. Now, Jack Welch never had to figure that out. Firing the bottom 10%, child's play, compared to, for example, texting your mom to see how she's doing while you're ordering dinner on Uber Eats, arranging for the carpool, answering the eight texts and emails about the meeting that just wrapped up with your boss, all while waiting impatiently for the red light to turn green so you're not late for your coffee with your client. The pace of work seems to be constantly increasing, and there's no slowdown in sight. And the workforce has also changed. Women have entered the workforce in much larger numbers during my working life. We're now balancing the differing lifestyles and needs of retirees who are coming back to work, the sandwich generation, Gen X, Gen Z, and the millennials. And beyond that, I hope we don't talk about the election today too much, but the global issues abound. And our phones ping us about those as often as we let them. It's the result, unprecedented levels of anxiety and uncertainty in the workplace. It calls for a new kind of leader. Jack Welch did push hard to get results. He pushed his people to be the best they could be with one track: learn, deliver, or else. Today, to help people move to their best, more is expected of an exceptional leader. They show that they're human, that they care, that they understand what their employees are going through. But I will do have to say something. Let me be very clear. Being generous is not simply about being nice. A leader must still be a very effective manager with exceptional business skills or leadership skills, depending on what you're doing, what your industry is. As Joaquin Duato, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, put it to me plainly, outcomes do matter. A leader must deliver results. But the sooner you learn to step past yourself, listen to others, and connect more fully with your team, the sooner you will release and be able to leverage all the human traits critical to get to the positive results. Working teams spend a lot of time together, and we work better if we're human together. Beyond that, the war for talent, for the best talent, demands a new kind of leader, one who shows that talent they care. If you don't, they will walk. The best will leave if they don't feel appreciated. If they're not convinced they're growing, they will leave. You must be a fully human leader. The old ways are just not going to cut it anymore. We're more than our titles, our job functions, or our place in the hierarchy. We all want to grow, we all want to improve, and today's generous leader pushes themselves to enable others to develop and grow and thrive at their full potential. My first job out of college was at Procter & Gamble. First as a sales rep, then I got promoted to sales manager with 3 reps reporting to me. They were in their 40s, I was 25. And frankly, I had no idea how to be a manager. I rode with them every 2 weeks, rarely given any feedback. I was simply in awe. Then it came time for year-end reviews. I compiled a list of all the things I thought each person could improve based on my training at P&G, and I launched into my review with Rich. A few minutes in, he cut me off and he said, "Joe, I think he said, what the hell, but what the heck? You ride with me every 2 weeks and you've never told me any of this?" I was mortified, and he taught me something about leadership in that moment. And after Rich left the room, Some of you made a point about, feedback in the moment, etc. My boss drew me aside and said, Joe, never again give feedback in the year in review that the person has not heard somewhere along the way during the year. That kind of thoughtlessness didn't cut it then, and it certainly won't cut it today. Today, we need leaders to understand what their employees are going through at a level far beyond what was good enough when I started my career. Today's leaders still must, of course, as I said, drive to positive outcomes, but they also bring their heart front and center into that leadership. They are generous. Since that time at P&G, I've worked across multiple roles at BCG, overseeing teams of 3 people to 7,000. And I spent a year interviewing many leaders across a variety of industries for my book on generous leadership. And I found the generous leaders touch their people in an organization in 7 ways. First, they communicate to connect, personally and deeply. Second, they're curious. They listen generously. Third, they welcome everyone. They practice generous inclusion. 4, they stand up for their employees. They are generous action allies. 5th, they do give clear recognition and feedback, ideally in the moment, and develop their people generously. 6th, they reach out in small ways that have big impact. They're generous in the moment. And finally, they are authentic and vulnerable. They put down the mask. So I'm going to touch on a few of these tonight. Some of you I know read my book. Thank you very much. And all of them are discussed there. Let me start with listening. The generous listener is curious. He or she listens deeply. They listen to hear what they do not know. They know they can learn by listening. No doubt you've heard this advice before, and maybe you consider yourself a very good listener. But let me ask this. To whom are you listening? The C-suite? Your other senior leaders in your organization? What about your direct reports, direct report? Or have you ever asked your executive assistant for their insights? Generous leaders ignore the traditional barriers of roles and titles. They ask and listen. They listen to learn. And with that, they show respect that inspires others. Google did a study called Project Oxygen. They interviewed 80,000 of their managers. And what was common amongst the best? They were a good coach. The way to be a good coach, they engaged and empowered employees. And the way they said they did that, they asked and listened, they asked and listened. Scott Kirby, CEO of United Airlines, he told me that he schedules a one-on-one interview with every single person who's being elevated to an officer position at United Airlines. Can you imagine just how rare that is? When I interviewed him, he told me about a time where he sat down with 3 vice presidents of operations. And they started out as technicians, as United called them. These are the people on the tarmac doing the maintenance every day so we fly safely and hopefully on time. It's a critical function, but many layers away from the CEO. But he was curious enough to ask, what do the technicians need most? And those 3 candidates, each said the same thing. Sir, we don't have enough spare parts on site. He said, that was such an epiphany for me. Our technicians are on the front line, and they want to do well. And when a company lets them down by not having spare parts on hand, they can't do their job, and they feel a lack of pride. The message, as Scott said, if the company doesn't care, why should I? So while the money people cringed, I increased parts in the airport, as I believe supporting the pride in our technicians would pay bigger dividends than worrying about the working capital. Asking better questions and listening does help you to solve challenges effectively. But crucially, it shows respect. It tells the person you see them as a human with valuable insights. It is motivating and it's inspiring. The next trait I'd like to touch on is small acts, big impact. A generous leader reaches out in small ways that bring a big impact. They are generous in the moment. Scott Kirby, sorry to pick on him again, is a big believer in the importance of small gestures. And he related to me a story of how his wife was on a flight just at the tail end of the pandemic, I think to Chicago. And the captain saw her on the plane and came out and said, "Oh, Mrs. Kirby, I have to tell you, I love United. I'm so proud to work, here and with your husband." She asked, "Why? What do you mean?" Well, she said, the captain said, well, and it was a black female captain. She recounted how Scott the husband, the CEO, had called each captain of color after the George Floyd murder to simply check in on how they were doing. Remembering that call, the captain said to Scott's wife, "I will do anything for United," because the CEO personally connected with me when it really mattered. So small gestures like this really do matter. They say, "I'm paying attention to you. You're important." And the key is the small gesture is symbolic of something that's meaningful to the recipient. It might be the birth of a child, a wedding, or sadly, the passing of a loved one. Small enough in the grandest scheme of things, but incredibly important to that individual. The acknowledgement makes them feel seen, it makes them feel important, and it makes them feel included in the community. A colleague of mine at BCG recounted to me a story. She said, if I tell one of my managers at the end of the week about something that's going to happen on the weekend, for example, my son has a big soccer tournament, when the manager comes back after the weekend and does the simple act of saying, "Hey, how was that soccer tournament?" She says, "I am so moved. And it makes me want to follow that manager anywhere." Very simple act. Small acts are about being a person first, acknowledging the details of someone else's life, being on time to meetings, engaging the least tenured person in the room, congratulating people on their wins or their exceptional outcomes, remembering birthdays, acknowledgement note for a job well done. You pick your small act, develop the system you need to make it work, and be consistent. The small acts are easy to do and pay huge dividends. And finally, I want to touch on the fact that generous leaders are vulnerable. They put down their mask. And to me, setting aside the mask may be the most important way you can be generous as leader, as it underpins almost all the other traits. Because a leader has positional power, people will follow your lead in the way you act and what you do more than what you tell them. And they want to follow the authentic you. And I know this is easier said than done. People say, what does the word vulnerable really mean? And how far are you suggesting I go? Do I have to cry in front of a whole room? But I'll say it can just begin with simply saying, "I don't know." I was talking with a colleague at BCG about his vulnerabilities. And he said to me that if he sensed his team was getting lost and he was in with the team room and they might ask him what to do and he didn't know the answer, he would literally leave the room before he'd get asked and have to admit he didn't know the answer. Real productive, huh? And he realized one day this is absolutely silly. So he stayed in the room and he admitted, "I don't know either." And he was astonished at what happened. The room erupted with energy and ideas. People thought, wow, if the boss doesn't know, it's okay for me not to know. It's okay for me to move past my fears, my roadblocks, acknowledge my own vulnerability, and get to work figuring it out. Arne Sorensen was Marriott's CEO from 2012 to his untimely death in 2021 from pancreatic cancer. And he was well known and beloved, not for only his success in growing Marriott, but also as a progressive leader, one who cared deeply about his people. And he gave a now famous address to over 80,000 Marriott employees in April 2020, just as everyone was beginning to realize how serious the COVID-19 pandemic was going to be. It was also happening right in the middle of his chemo treatments. As Forbes magazine reported, Arne was, on this video, candid, vulnerable, humble, emotional, and hopeful. He appeared on screen with a suit, his tie was slightly off-center. He was real and authentic, showing up in his true and vulnerable self, totally bald from the medical treatments, and courageously showing his own emotional vulnerability under a set of circumstances he and the company and the world were experiencing. The idea from Arne was simple. Keep it honest, keep it direct, keep it simple. You be you, and you will establish credibility and trust. During my wedding at age 23, I cried through my vows. I was mortified. What guy cries through his vows? And my wife, Sarah, clears the bell the whole time. But I will tell you, afterwards, a number of people that came up to me and said, "Oh, wow, the love and emotion in that room or that church was incredible." I don't think I knew at the moment what the signal they were sending to me, but it was very powerful. Then my mother died when I was 30, and I tried to speak at the funeral, but guess what? I just sobbed this time. I couldn't get anything out. And kindly the priest, though, intervened and said, "Don't worry, Joe, for tears are the fountains of love." And as you might have guessed, again, people came up to me and commented on the love and emotion they felt in that room. Samir Bodis, he's the CEO of Icertis. It's a procurement company. Told me once, he said, Joe, I was originally all about the numbers when I graduated from Wharton Business School some 30 years ago. He said, then I went to Microsoft, where it is all about the numbers. He said, I didn't even know what empathy was. But then he had an opportunity to lead a small company through a turnaround. The company had been lying to itself, its customers, and its suppliers. And he said, I had to get our people to admit to our failures, or we were never going to improve. We had to be vulnerable, admit we were wrong, and change. It was hard, he said, but it was a process that I had to begin within myself. He said, it may sound funny, but I started to practice introspection. So a leader must deliver outcomes. Samir always felt that, but you also must get past yourself and realize it's all about the people you motivate and inspire. That's where the results come from, not from you alone. Now, I think I'm going to ask you to do something. Do we have the cards? Yep. So some folks here are going to hand out a little card. On one side, it's 3x5. That's 7 practices, the 7 practices I noted on one side. On the other, I'd like you to continue the process of generosity. There's a lot of you here, so I won't wait for everybody. But it's just very simply, if you have a pen, write 1 or 2, 3 sentences to a colleague back at quote-unquote the office, whatever that might be for you, telling them how much you appreciate some specific thing they have done. And so I won't stop because it'll take a long time for 250 people to write, but please take the time to do this. And then I ask that you simply, when you get back to wherever you see them again, hand them the card. Just give them the card. Very easy, small act. A moment ago, I told you about Samir Bodis, who learned empathy on the job. He's learned so well that he says, what he told me, he sits down at the end of each year and asks himself a set of questions. How have I learned to be a better leader? How have I learned to be a better husband? A better father? Am I a better human being? And then where can I push further? And he tells me if the answer to the last question is a short list, then he realizes he's getting a little bit arrogant, and he sits down and thinks through it again. So we can all learn to connect more personally and deeply. We can all work to listen more generously. We can all practice generous inclusion, and we can all look for ways to stand up for our teammates and our employees. We can also work to give recognition and feedback so that others may thrive at their full potential. And we can reach out in small ways that have big impact. We can be generous in the moment. And finally, let's all agree to drop the mask. People want to follow the confident yet authentic you. We are all human, and our vulnerability will inspire others to be real and authentic too. When they see you bring your heart into your leadership and share your humanity, I promise you, your teams will follow you anywhere. And that power is generative. It will ripple through your team, your organization, and maybe even through our society. Thank you. I think now I'm turning it over to you, to us, right? Don't fall back.
All right, folks, I know you're holding a new index card, but how about you put it down for a second to give a round of applause to Mr. Joe Davis once again. I think a true breath of fresh air when we're talking about leadership and we're talking about a way to approach it and thinking about what we've learned from leaders of yesterday, what we're observing of leaders today, and what we can take into the future with us as leaders tomorrow. Joe, I want to go back to the beginning of when did you realize you had a book in you and that you had to do this work and put this out, that you've become the generous leader, you have a message, you want the audience to get it. How did you decide you had a book?
Yeah, I don't want to be called the generous leader. I just believe in that kind of leadership. How did I, well, you know what, it was actually a few things, but one thing, as we came out of COVID, I had a number of colleagues, and that was, as we all know, a rather tough experience where leadership either behaved like Arnie and really, thrived as leaders or not. And I had another colleague said, Joe, you should really write about that leadership experience and some of the things you've learned. So that was one motivator. I also, kind of funny, I found this list of life's goals. We didn't say bucket list. I wrote it when I was 13. We didn't say bucket list back then. But on there said, get something published. I had lost this piece of paper for 40 years, but that was on there, so I guess I wanted to do something. But it was those people motivating me. But then importantly, I did want to just add my voice to this message. I mean, Brené Brown writes about vulnerability. Rachel Scott writes about radical candor. There's a lot of people writing these books. But a friend, is trying to share this message. But a friend said, Joe, you'll touch a different set of people. And if you move 7 people to change their management, that'll be good. Now, I've got higher aspirations than 7 now, but that's kind of what inspired me.
I was going to say more than 7 people in this room tonight alone. But I'm glad you brought up the pandemic, because it plays such, to me, an important part of this book, because you talk about navigating a once-in-a-century crisis, what that looks like. For a large organization like Boston Consulting Group, you woke up early one morning, I think it's a Thursday in the book, and you decide to write an email. You spend 45 minutes working on the email, and you click send. What led you to want to write the email? What was the message? What was your hope?
Okay, that's a personal question. So, it's interesting. I do care about even at that time I had 7,000 people. I cared about every single one of them, probably all the time. I mean, literally, I'd sit there at night and think about, wow. I had met somebody by Zoom. I had a partner of mine said, Joe, you're a senior partner. You have a big old house. You don't understand what's going on with, our staff. You need to talk to somebody. Meet with some people by Zoom, of course. So I met with one guy who was on his bed. And I said, what are you doing on your bed? He said, well, Joe, I've bedroom, living room, kitchen, it's all attached. One week, my wife gets the couch with the coffee table, and the other week I get the bed, then we switch. And that's our office. And I won't tell you how big my house was, but I had 4 children I raised in it. So I thought, oh my, this is a different world. So it was constantly going through my mind, people are living in a pretty tough situation. So yeah, I woke up at 4:30. And decided I wanted to send a note to all of them. And email works pretty well at BCG. But it took 45 minutes because all these things are going. It just said, I can't read. You could probably read it, but whether you're at home alone, at home with 2 kids, or at home with 2 dogs, or 2 dogs and 2 kids, and tripping over each other, just all the things we remember going through in one way or the other. I just, we're BCG's here for you. We're here for you. I'm here for you, whatever that means, because, I can't help them individually. And just want to let you know I'm thinking about you. But it was interesting, because the reason it took 45 minutes is, a lot of things go through your mind, like, well, wow, first off, are they going to think, oh, I see, he gets up 4:30, so I have to get up at 4:30. So you didn't want to send that signal. Or, well, who is he to know what my life is, senior person, 30 years at BCG. Or do my colleagues think, what the heck? If Joe's getting up and write notes, do I have to get up and write notes? So there's a lot of these things. But I thought, what the heck? I just so deeply wanted to connect with people. And I'll tell you, I sent it at 5:15. By 5:16, and this was East Coast time, so people weren't awake. By 5:16, the answers started coming in. It was amazing, actually.
What was that response like to that? Because I think that for you, you're checking a lot off the list. You're communicating, you're inviting space to listen, you're putting the mask down, you're drawing people in. We see the generous leadership in action. What did you expect the response to be? Aside from the, oh gosh, he's up at 5 a.m., I have to be up at 5 a.m. What were you expecting once you sent it? And were you still sitting at the computer, or had you walked away, or is your phone dinging, because they ding all the time and we get all the notifications? But what was the response like?
Well, it was, I don't think I had time to step away before the first answer came in, to be honest with you. The responses were just really warm, like, wow, thank you. I was thinking that, or wow, you touched what I went through last night, or wow, I guess we're all in this together. And, there was a lot of appreciation, because this is something, a leader, you might think, oh, should I really, this is your point, should I touch people this personally? Should I be this vulnerable? Should I pretend to even know what they're thinking? But people want to know thinking about them. You can't solve everything, but at least you're there and trying. So the responses were pretty immediate long versions of thank you, thank you, thank you. That's what my life was like. Yeah.
And it created this back and forth of people sharing images, and I think, their experience.
You read the book. I'm impressed.
Well, that's part of the homework assignment for me tonight, right? And other people in the audience I've had a chance to talk with. And that, of course, is a great time for me to remind folks who haven't read the book or don't yet have a copy, there's a book sale and signing with the author immediately following this. But I think I was just moved with the really human experience about that. But what happens when companies are thinking, this sounds really great, but am I opening myself up to some sort of human resources nightmare? If I'm being too vulnerable, I'm being too personal, I'm offering too much of myself with employees, where do I draw a line? How do I navigate that? Because I appreciate be yourself, be authentic, but how do you be mindful of that in a company that says, we need to run this through HR first?
Wow. I can't fathom running it through HR first, but you're right, some companies might make you. That's not their job to tell you how to connect with your people. I'll tell you what, if you really do want your people to be and perform and do their best, and you don't have to care about them personally, but you want that. If you really want that, that's the first lens. You're not going to make many mistakes if you're thinking about, do I send this note? Do I call somebody? Does Scott Kirby call every person of color, captain of color, and say, hey, how you doing? Even though that probably was rather controversial. He's in Texas, So I think the first thing is if you're coming from the right place, that you really do care, or you just want to make sure they're doing damn well themselves, which is a version of caring, because while I said there's no direct benefit, of course there's indirect benefit. If your team's thriving, you're going to thrive. I think that you just got to start with that mental map. And then, where do you draw the line so you're not overwhelmed?
Or how do you figure out whether or not a line needs to be drawn? I think at the heart of what I'm wondering is how do you have that open conversation if you have a company that approaches with an abundance of caution?
Well, okay. I guess depending on what role you're in. If you're in the leadership team, just insist the leadership team has a conversation about how we're going to connect with our people, and bring HR in the room if you have to. If you're concerned about, just practically, if you're concerned yourself, go talk with HR. But, I'm not suggesting, you write Jimmy and say, hey, how was last night with your wife and your two children. You're not digging into their life unless they're friends of yours, but you're just connecting, knowing, trying to think through what people are going through and connect to that. And not many people are going to resist that. I don't know. I don't have the best answer for you.
So looking at the 7 different traits and looking at how you've come up with them, put them into practice, and you've talked to other CEOs, I think that's a powerful point in the book too, is it's your voice, but it's others affirming their experience as well. Either when you were talking to them or you've observed other people in leadership roles, what do they struggle with the most out of the 7? Where do you see leaders who are trying to develop their skills, hone their work, where do you see them get tripped up? What's toughest for them?
Well, to be really frank, there's different people have different challenges and traits, but the whole idea of what does it mean to be authentic and therefore vulnerable, that's, I think, where people trip. And that word can mean so many different things. I have a colleague, a leader, who's, he's not perfect, but he sure acts like he's perfect. And he's a good look, and his daughter's good, his wife is good looking, his kid, everything just seems to be perfect. He's got a big client. It's like, whoa, where did you come from? But he cares deeply about his people. But they don't know it because nobody else can be so perfect. So they just think, oh my gosh, he's untouchable. And he's just like frustrated as hell. Well, Joe, I care. I said, okay, then did something go bad yesterday? No. Yet the day before? Yeah. Okay, tell us. Tell us something. Tell us you had a hard day. Show a little bit of authenticity. So I think this whole, and that's one, where do you draw the line on vulnerability yourself? And, I do think I like that story about I don't know, because that's a pretty simple thing. If you haven't learned how to say I don't know by the time any stage in life, maybe not a little kid, but, most stages, that's the easiest way to show some vulnerability, which is quite freeing. And the other thing I'd say there is, I think as I said in the book on that topic, you know, everyone's got to figure out when to step over the line and draw their own line. And one friend of me said, a couple of stories, one leader said to me, well, Joe, I just would watch other leaders, and if they were sharing a vulnerable moment, I wasn't going to do what they were doing, but how did they do it? What was the reaction? You know, how did that go for them? Or a good friend of mine said, well, Joe, think back in your life when something, you know, like the wedding and my mom's death, or I'll tell another funny story. I once took piano lessons when I was 28, like I did when I was 7, but and at 28, I was like I was 7, and I had to do a recital, and I was the 28-year-old, everybody else was 5, 6, and 7, maybe 8, and there's a boy in the front row, and you know, little kids, Mommy, he's really nervous, and I was petrified, but, you know, ding, 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 you know, like whatever I played. But, you know, I look back at that, and I thought, wow, I was scared to death, I was embarrassed, I made it, I'm here, it was fine. So, you know, go back and find your moments like that. Say, oh, okay, it hurt a little, didn't hurt that much. Sharing a little vulnerability, in that case, being a 20-year-old and a 10-year-old recital. So I think that's another important thing, is you can look back in your life. Now then, I won't comment on, you know, people draw different lines. I'm not, you know, if you're a 30-year-old, 32-year-old black woman in a tense place, do you want to just cry immediately, you know, or a black or white or male even? I mean, you got to think about where you draw your line on the vulnerability. That's a long answer to your question. There's different leaders struggled with different of those traits, I will, to be honest with you.
And so if somebody's coming at this for the first time and discovering the 7 traits and wondering how did they get started, where did they get started, what do you advise that they do? Because I found part of the book, a reason it was so engaging for me is that you can certainly read it cover to cover, but you can also skip around. You can go to your section. So you can read it out of order. You can choose your own adventure. But when people ask you the question of, okay, Joe, this is a great book. I appreciate all the advice, but if I'm going to start working on this and I'm taking it seriously, where and how do you recommend I start?
See that little card he's handing out? Fill it out. Write something on it and give it to somebody. So, I mean, I really believe this idea, I mean, this is an easy one. I have two places I'd start, but this idea of small acts, big impact. I mean, even someone said, well, Joe, you're always on time for meetings, and so is always late. And it actually sends a big message. Oh, you care about us. We're not sure that person does. And I won't comment on whether they do it. So you can really do simple gestures. You know, someone does a good job on something, send an email to them and copy everybody on the team or copy their boss, whatever it might be. You know, it's just, those are simple. Remember a birthday. The other one I think those really important is this whole idea of ask and listen. You know, really take the time. I mean, every leader asks questions over and over. They all believe they do not know the answer of these type of leaders. None of them thought they knew all the answers. It's impossible. If you have a complicated question, how can you know the answer? So they all were very, very good at asking. And then not just asking, but listening. I mean, you know, I've always trained at BCG, my mentor, and then trained people, you know, what is in your head that you're thinking about that I don't get? You know, because I might think I know the answer, but you have something in your mind that I don't understand. And once I understand it, then either I can know how to convince you, you know, tell you more about what I'm thinking, or more importantly, put the two together. So I think this idea of asking questions, starting everything with a question, don't assume the answer, is a pretty damn easy trait. But you do have to take the time to listen too. And if you hear something counter to what you believe, you know, we could talk about our country. If everyone would ask and at least take the perspective of another person for a minute, you know, that might make a difference.
Well, I think that's what's really applicable here is being a generous communicator, being a generous listener, being a curious listener, doing both things, you know, being able to realize that it's a two-way street. And I think that, you know, the simple starting point is asking why, you know, if you don't understand something. Like, it's a really easy way to get started. I want to go back to, because I was fumbling to make sure my notification's off, because I'm a get notifications from everything kind of guy, and some aren't, some are somewhere in the middle. For leaders who are working, that see that just the amount of time they have to put in, the notifications made me think of that. You know, sending the emails early, sending emails late, always on, always accessible. how do you balance life and work as a leader and being a generous leader? What do you see today? You know, because there can be that high burnout rate of I've got to put in the 60 hours a week, I've got to put out the 80 hours a week to prove myself and climb, and I'm always on, I'm always accessible, my team always has access to me. How can a leader achieve that work-life balance, being accessible but not always on?
Yeah, let me answer that two ways. I mean, I'm going to have first answer, which is if you don't love your job, get a new one. I mean, that sounds silly, but if you love your job, you can work and work, and you don't even like, oh, I'm not even working, you know. And it comes home with you. I guess you love your job. Is that why you patted her? It comes home with you, but you're happy. If you hate your, so I do think this the first, or you know, and not everyone is. That's an interesting thing as leaders. They all took paths like this. There were times where they didn't have the job they loved, but I do think, you know, make sure you really love what you're doing because it's a lot easy. Because that's not a work-life blur. It's just life. That's one thing I'd say. And then there'll be times, of course, where it's not the best job. But even if it's not exactly what you're loving, make sure you pull everything out of it. The other thing I'd say to your question about how to find the time is it ain't that complicated. I mean, sending someone a note saying, good job, that's 4 or 7 letters. That takes about, what, half a second? And you hit send and you're done. You know, there's people that strive. One time my daughter, she wanted to send a note to some podcast person she loves to say, you should interview my dad. I said, okay, well, let's send her the note. Of course, the lady didn't respond. It was someone well-known. But she diddled over this email for like 25 minutes. I said, Sadie, just say, hey, my dad, boom, 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 and I hit send. Oh, but Dad, and 25 minutes. I mean, God, that's a lot of time. She has 4 kids, so that's what. But I think that's something people don't understand. You can just, you know, you can just, oh, so-and-so did good. Grab the phone, send a quick, literally simple messages. And that doesn't take much time. And it's very powerful. Or, you know, another thing, someone said, well, prepare for me. If you're going to go to a meeting with some people, you know, have people in the room that you don't know so well, or some junior people, you know, while you're walking to the meeting, if you have to prep the 10 minutes walking, you know, take the time on the walk. Think, okay, who's going to be here? What do they know I don't know? What questions could I ask them? And, you know, some go, oh, I don't have time to prep for a meeting. Well, you have the 6-minute, 8-minute walk, and if, you know, you're probably smart enough to think through at least what questions might I ask a few people here. So I think it's a lot of it. 1, love what you're doing. Sorry, that's simplistic, but I believe it. And 2, you know, just keep messages simple when you're connecting with people.
Well, I think it's the mode of communication too, because some might find this tough to believe if they know that, you know, for some of my work, I'm a writer. I write extensively long emails, and I take it on the chin every time. And I've learned to write better emails, right? Communicate quickly. Can you read it on a screen? Is this an important message? We don't have to scroll through an endlessly long email of as the winds went sweeping down the valley. We don't need all of that. What we do need is your questions, and I've got plenty more, and I'll keep them coming. I appreciate the early ones, and you know, great job. These are the cards that we need the questions on, not the ones that you're supposed to write something to a colleague or someone that you're working with or have worked with that you could take to them. So I appreciate that. This one right off the top, I think is a really great one, Joe. How do we find, because this is sort of a chicken or an egg kind of question, how do we find the right people to surround ourselves with as a leader, or do they find you? That magnetism, that orbit, do we find the right people and hunt them out, or being a generous, good leader, they're attracted to you? What are you seeing?
Well, if you really are a generous and good leader, they will be attracted to you. You know, if you're on that game all the time, which takes work. But I think, and I do think the thing, you know, I just think this idea of development, one of you mentioned it in the opening, right? If you are spending time really developing and growing others, they know it. And they're going to want to be in it. I had a mentor who was tough as all get out. And most people couldn't deal with him. But I knew all he cared about. He's the one that said, actually, the story you read is actually worse than that. He said, Joe, if I put you and this other BCGer in a room, 4 white walls, no doors, no windows, and give you a really tough problem, you'll never get out. Oh, thank you very much. He'll always get out. It's okay. I'm not the smartest guy. I got that. But when you get out and I ask you to get it done, this other fellow will never get the job done, and you'll get it done every time. Because you know what you don't know, you figure out who to surround yourself with, etc. So I think the idea of if you really are concentrating on, I'm going to help you grow and be better, and that could be, you still have to be direct. You can't do what I did when I was 23 or 25, whatever. That's the one thing I think people will attract to you. But I also, that message could also be almost about mentors. I mean, I do have a belief when you start to click with somebody, either way, if you have people that work with you that you're clicking with, man, hang on to them. And now make sure you're growing them and give them the time of day and make sure they're growing. And if you're someone that you found a leader that you're clicking with, hang on the other way, but you have to give too. I mean, this mentor I mentioned, he's moving to Washington. I didn't have to move, but he said, well, Joe, and I was in Boston, my wife and I, there wasn't home for us, so I went with him because why not? Now, I'm not saying move, but I wanted to make sure this guy was doing everything to grow me, so I wanted to not leave it. So I think the biggest thing would be when you find people you're really connecting with, really try to do everything to grow and develop them. The other thing, you didn't quite say this in the question, but I always look for people better than me at everything I wasn't good at. Now that's, you hear that all the time, but man, I'll tell you, get past your ego and do that, you're going to do a lot better in life than not. And as long as you're growing them at what you're good at, then it's all fair game. It's all fair.
I'll give credit where credit's due. Our president, Dr. Ferky Ferrati, says that all the time. Of find people that are better at something you're not good at, get them on the team.
Yeah.
Surround people with that. I think that's so important. I think part of it too is that being open to continue to grow. That just because you're a leader doesn't mean you've somehow hit the top of the mountain and there's nowhere else to go. So I'd like to hear you speak a little bit on the continued development of yourself as a leader. Seeing that just because you've got whatever title it is you were striving for or whatever position in a company, it doesn't mean you're done, that you're still working at it, you're still perfecting it. And whether or not we ever get to perfection, we're still striving for it. So speak a little bit about the continued self-development as a leader.
Well, okay. I mean, it's interesting the way you said, because probably most people that are striving for leadership are always looking how to grow and be better. Otherwise, you're not going to be growing into roles. But I do think, if I just think across my career, anytime, and actually all these leaders I interviewed, they all moved around in roles. And every time you move into a role, you just don't know what you're doing right off the bat. And that's a wonderful situation to be in because you really have to force yourself to grow and develop in new ways. It's for me, when I get myself in those situations, I have a couple rules. I always make sure when I went out to run the West Coast for BCG, I talked to every senior person in the consulting ranks and in the support team ranks about how's it going here? What can you tell me? Just like I had no pride, no ego. And there's a lot of interviews with everyone because there's always somebody there that knows something you don't know. And then just putting yourself in those kind of situations, you're going to be forced to learn, and as long, get people to coach you, tolerate when you make mistakes, you'll be continuing growing. That was one beauty of COVID, because I don't think any leader, nobody knew what they were doing. Nobody. None of us. Arnie Sorensen did. Scott Kirby told me, he said, I'm going to tell everybody, well, we don't know when planes are going to fly again. And he said his team would say, well, don't say that. You're going to scare everybody, and aren't you supposed to know? He said, well, how the hell am I going to know? Nobody knows. So, any of these new experiences, dive into them and, gather as much information, learn from everybody around you, and you're going to keep growing.
And speaking right to that of the changes of COVID and the impacts of COVID, somebody from the audience has a question about, working remotely and the changes. What are some of the approaches to acknowledging the small things or communicating more consistently in remote work environments? We all learned immediately. We got sent home, we had our software, and suddenly we're setting up cameras and microphones and sitting in places we never thought we'd work, and maybe we thought it was going to be 2 weeks. For some people, it looks like it's going to be decades that they're working remotely. So what are some of the approaches to acknowledging the small things or communicating more consistently with remote workers?
Well, I know people don't use this thing to talk, but you could call them. You could actually call somebody, not text, not Slack, not email, whatever you do. So that'd be the first thing I would say is if someone did a good job, pick up the phone and say thank you. Or even be as dramatic as book a Zoom meeting, but that sounds too, as opposed to just calling. It's funny, on the I don't buy the, it's a different thing when you say, how do we stay connected? But I don't buy that you can't do the small acts just because we're remote. Whether you use Slack or text or email or I mean, or you could write a note. That'll take 3 or 4 days to get there, but you could even write a note thanking somebody. They will love it. They'll put that note on their desk, and they'll never. Well, maybe eventually they clean up, but it's going to sit there for a long time if you write a short note that makes someone proud. So I don't think it's any different than walking down the hall and telling somebody they did a good job. It might be easier because some people are embarrassed to really look someone in the eye and tell them they did a good job. So write a note. So I think, sorry, don't have very simple. I have a very simple answer.
Pick up the phone and call. It's doable. You can
That's
still
doable.
connect. I appreciate that. And this person's asking, back to the idea of, we were talking about magnetism or orbit, and how do you find the right leader, or do they attract them, which comes first? This person's specifically asking, how do you hunt it out? What to look for when you're looking for a mentor, you're looking for somebody that's going to help coach you up. What advice would you give to younger folks, who are leaders or future leaders looking to find the right mentors?
Yeah. So the first thing, well, it depends on what kind of business you're in. I mean, I have the consulting perspective where you move through projects, so you work with a lot of different managers, so it's a little bit easier but I do think the first thing is when you work with somebody that it clicks. I'm not repeat myself, when that happens, you just grab on, you grab on and don't let go. And then if you're working, it depends on the kind of business you're in. But if none of your managers you're just clicking with at all, well then, eventually they might change, or you might move around, or find them, ask around who are good people that are good coaches, and go ask, say, hey, can I talk to you once every 2 weeks on different, well, that's the Erie program. Do the Erie program, go find someone who's willing to coach you and just ask them. I think the interesting thing, I don't know if there's young people in here right now, but I'm older than you, but most more senior people love it when someone says, hey, can you help me on something? Nothing makes you feel better, right? Oh, yeah, thank you for asking. What is it? Now, if it's going to take all day and you don't have time, that's different. But I don't think many senior people don't like to help when they're asked. So actually, I think even be a little bit brave. If you're hearing about this person's a good coach, this person's willing to help, this person is very good at such and such, and you want to be better at that, I'd actually go, quote unquote, knock on the door in whatever fashion.
I think that first step is have the courage to take that first step. And I think part of it maybe is a perception of, this person's so good, everybody must be knocking down their door or flooding their inbox. But if everybody's just as apprehensive as you, maybe nobody's been bold enough.
Yeah, I don't think everyone's knocking on every. Some of you are smiling. I think you know what I mean. So yeah, you could ask me more. You just don't want to have that fear. And if they say, hey, I'm too busy, well, then they weren't the right person anyway.
One of the things that I appreciated about the book was you were speaking about a survey that you had conducted, and you looked at the 18 different qualities across head, heart, and hands for folks.
Yeah, that was BCG, but yeah, we did that. Yeah,
the characteristics that you were looking for, and what clearly emerged was, looking for in leaders recognition, and then looking for coaches and developers. Was that a shock that was the results of the survey, or did you find what you expected to find?
I think the intellectual strategy side of BCG was probably shocked. Wait a minute, you can't just get the best answer and come up with the best PowerPoint deck to explain how the world goes. But I don't think I don't think it was, well, yeah, I was actually, what was it, I think 3 of the top 5 were all kind of heart things, not head. So it was actually, there was like brilliant strategist, good, a good motivator of the team, or someone who set real good plans and metrics. All these, there's 18 different characteristics of good management. The fact that, most of the top ones were all heart-led doesn't surprise me. And I think if you ask any very senior person, where they realize they can't do it all. I mean, this Joaquin Duato, he has 120,000 employees. He can't do anything. I mean, he talks to the street, and he allocates resources. And then all he can do after that is motivate and inspire. That's all he can do. He might not appreciate I said that, but
no, but I think that's powerful, is empowering the moment to be able to create that sort of climate. And I think that's maybe a top-down approach, but One of the things too that is I think important about the book is rethinking the old structure, that it has to be this siloed approach to organization and leadership, and that actually there's some power to working cross-functionally, or some power to thinking in flatter terms for an organization. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. No, I call that generous inclusion. A lot of people immediately think inclusion of diversity, which of course, but that's not what I meant. By that I mean what you just said, including people. If you have a meeting, you're a leader, don't just have your chief of staff and your 3 people in the meeting. You're not gonna learn crap. They're not gonna tell you the truth anyway, probably. Have someone from that department and someone from that department. I was a big believer on bringing the finance person that did the spreadsheet into the room. Now, they were petrified to have to answer to me, but once they got used to it, they said, well, Joe, it was so empowering, because, usually they do the spreadsheet, they give it to that person, and then it's in the meeting with you. And that was something that almost all the leaders talked about. When Joanne Crevis sat, they had a tapestry with Kate Spade on. She said, I will literally go out and walk around and find people who are doing the work and asking what's really going on. So I think that, and people, people don't always do that for a lot of reasons. I think one, they're afraid they might be exposed, that they don't know the answers, or they have to ask questions that they're, and they don't want to, expose themselves to that, or they're uncertain, what they're even asked the less tenured person. But I'll tell you, when you include a broader set than just either, whether it's, as I say, cross departments, or more importantly, I think more junior, you're going to get insights in doesn't matter what you're doing. My daughter's a soccer coach. If she asks the least good player on the team what's going on, she's probably going to learn a lot more than the superstar. The superstar is going to only know, well, I know what's going on. I'm a star. What are you asking me this for? Whereas the kid that's struggling to play is going to give her a lot more insights about how she's coaching.
Well, I think that to me reveals something similar to what you had said in your remarks about the frontline workers, those who are actually doing the thing, and the idea that seeing how people can elevate up the ladder who started on the tarmac, for instance, and where they began. One of the things I thought was interesting too, thinking about inclusivity, thinking about how we approach it, is that sometimes the people at the top get excluded as well. And you talked about this example with Geraldine Rhodes of her being included. Talk about sometimes we lose the people at the top because we perceive they just don't need to be in the loop, or they don't need to be included, or they're too busy. The importance of thinking about other people in organizations, and where maybe this isn't a top level task, but it's important to have their knowledge, their expertise, their energy, their excitement on that.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting angle. You're right. I was more worried about people going down. But you're right. I mean, yeah, I think, well, it's just almost like finding the mentor, going to ask somebody for help, or going to ask a few questions. I think usually a leader is going to be, oh, wow, or bring in some insight. You got to be careful if you have a boss and a boss and a boss and you're going around them, but bring in some insight. I don't think that many senior leaders are going to struggle with that. Yeah, I think I have to think more about that angle, because it's a very good angle.
Right, and I think it's the idea of thinking maybe perhaps, who can really help out, who has the capacity, who's able to be a part of the solution, or a part of a way to address that. Sometimes leaders have to make tough decisions in tough moments. This is coming from the crowd asking, how can you be a generous leader if you find yourself in a position of having to make cutbacks, having to make layoffs? How does the generous leader navigate, not the neutron jack of just bottom 10% getting cut, but your business needs to make some cuts and layoffs? How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, because when you asked about how I evolved, I was talking to the Miami office recently, and I said, well, Joe, we used to think you were like one tough son of a gun, and we'd be scared to talk to you, and like, when did you get nice? And I said, and what made you get nice? I don't know. I have to think about that question. But I do think there's a couple things. If I think about when I have to face those kind of situations, now there's 2 types of ways to think about it. People just aren't fitting in that role and they have to be let go, which actually that's quite generous to let them go, because if they don't fit, they're not going to grow. You're actually holding them back. You are really being ungenerous. So, but you got to understand that, and in that situation, and I'll go to your second one too, but in that one, I just spent a lot of time thinking about, where's this person's head? How are they feeling? And then usually having I had a story one time, a colleague of mine was a very high performer in Europe. He transferred to the US and he was failing. And 3 years of failing, we let you go. He was a partner. And I knew he was struggling. One day I sat down with him and someone said, how could you do that? I said, listen, his name was Allard. Allard, either you quit, you go home, or I fire you. You pick. That's all I said. And he's, oh, thank you. And I knew he was sitting there at night worried about, should I quit? He's, okay, fine, I'll go home. Now he's a superstar again. On the the layoffs, I think 2 points. If you're really in a situation like that in whatever organization, as everybody said, the organization, you do have to deliver outcomes. So if you got to make changes, you have to do it. Just make sure you do have to go as far as you're going, is my first thought. And then I would think, that's just practically, you have to keep the people who are going to drive the business forward the most. And then, as far as letting the others go, I think the best thing is, first off, be honest, be direct. Don't be Elon Musk, send a text at 2 o'clock to fire him at 3 o'clock or whatever he did, when he bought Twitter. So I think that thing, if you're clear on why we're going through this, if you're clear on the communications, if it's honest and not some BS that they can all see through, and then handle it with grace, and at least I would argue be as generous as you can as they go out the door with time off and whatever, I think it works. But it really starts with the communication and honesty. The minute you start to BS people, they know it so fast.
Well, I think in addition to the honesty, it's that being authentic. And then I think of the, take off the mask, put down the mask, be vulnerable. You spoke about your vulnerability speaking at your mom's funeral. I think one of the most touching parts of the book that really stuck with me is talking about your dad. Yeah. And how that's led you to be vulnerable and open, but also approach your work in inclusivity. Can you tell us a bit about that transformation, that journey with your dad, that discovery, and then how you've been able to speak out about that?
Yeah, how long do you want me to go? That's I don't know if those of you who skimmed the book, you know what he's talking about or read it. My dad was gay, he's dead now, but he was gay. And that's why my parents got divorced, but I never knew that. So I didn't figure that out for a long time. They'd never divorced, actually. I don't think they divorced maybe 30 years later, but they separated. But I was 8 years old. We separated. And it's, that's such a big question, Ben. So the first thing that as I reflected back, there are a million signs, not a million, tens of signs that my dad was gay, and I just didn't see any of them. Probably because what 16-year-old kid, this is all 40, 50 years ago, everybody, thinks, oh, my dad's gay. Well, wait, if he's gay, how am I? Just these weird things start going through your head, I don't think I even let them go through my head, because my wife, we got married when we were 22. She goes, well, I didn't realize it until I was like 28. She goes, well, I knew, and I told you. And I said, well, I know, I never heard you tell me. So I think even there, I might have blocked it out. Sorry, I'm just admitting it. I'll tell you one little story. My dad had a bar in his house, and he had a painting, and the painting was of a bar with 6 bar stools and 8 naked men. You'd think I might have figured out something was a little different, And he had a roommate for 30 years who was a guy. You'd think I might have figured something out, but no, I didn't figure it out. I could tell you more stories. But I do think, I think when I really faced it is when my wife said, oh, he's got a lot of pills on the table, and they were to fight HIV and AIDS. And then you can't, whatever denying I was trying to do or doing, there's no denying now. The guy's dying. But it was, it took me a long time, even after when I knew it. I was open with myself, open with Sarah, but it took me a long time to just talk about it in front of people. Once I did that, of course, it's the theme, it's just so freeing. And, you're right, as far as it probably had a lot to do with why I'm, whether it's I'm a big champion on diversity. I've watched, if I think back now, all this hardness in the, the 60s in San Francisco, 60s and 70s in San Francisco was this tough time to be gay. Well, it can be a tough time depending on your environment, any time. I think it just opened me up to, okay, there's people with different situations who are just regular old good guys like my dad was, or good people. And so why don't I step back and understand that? And then I think I became much more of a champion of that. I don't know. It's a very. I don't know if I answered what you were asking
No,
exactly.
you did, because I think that there's a power to people who end up in position. And I say people like the two of us sitting up here is two straight white guys.
Yeah, I know.
And,
No, I'm
and
so
just
privileged.
being able to speak that out and then give it power and then have others be able to enter that conversation. That I think there's something really powerful about that. And I was moved with that. A smaller thing that I found interesting, and I couldn't help but think of Doris Kearns Goodwin's team of rivals of don't surround yourself by yes people. You say find the noologists.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by noologists, and why is it important to surround ourselves by them?
Well, I mean, this is a classic thing in consulting, but we're trying to come up with insight on where they should go, and then how whatever the organization gets there. And so I'm a big believer in engage the skeptics. The person, no, that's never going to work. And usually people think, oh, that person's just a blocker. They're a pain in the neck. We got to get them out of the way. I'll bet you 1 out of 1,000 times they actually are just a pain in the neck. They might be a pain in the neck the way they present themselves, but they always know something you don't know about why it won't work. Just some little thing. And, you got to know that, or you're not going to have the best solution. And so I'm a big believer. I just think I probably live my life that way a little bit, but at work environment, for sure, in any environment, okay, so you don't think it's going to work. Instead of thinking, oh, you're an idiot, what do you know that I don't know? Which goes right back to ask and listen.
And I think that's
It's a very simple concept, actually.
Right, that curiosity of what do you have access to that I don't? What sort of information, capital, resources, whatever that I'm not aware of, how do you help me with that? So we have time for just 2 final questions that I'm going to ask. One is to comment on somebody else that is included in this book. We, of course, know Fiona Hill because she came to the Global Summit 2 years ago. She calls you a remarkable person and calls for the need of why we need such a book on generous leadership, why we need it today, why it's important for business and beyond. Tell us a little bit about how you came to know Fiona Hill.
Well, it's very simple. Her husband works at BCG, so she's a good friend. She lives down the street. She was at dinner the other day. So to be most frank, it's her husband started at BCG in the Washington office when I ran it, and so we always became. We became quite close over time. You can read that, but she observed me in my different roles over the years. So we become, and you guys had her too. She is incredible. As you know, she is brilliant. I'll tell you, can I tell you a sad thing related to the election? That she was the one that testified against Trump in the impeachment stuff. She's actually had, I think it's now 4 countries that have offered asylum. And she's ready to leave if they think they have to. What has happened to America? If someone like her thinks she might have to leave, and her husband, it's just, I shouldn't have said that. It's so depressing. But, we brought up the election a little bit here.
No, I think it's important to speak those things out because for those, look, something big happened yesterday. And if this room represents the country, more than half of us are happy and satisfied with the outcome. Another half of us aren't, but clearly a lot is at stake and continues to be. And for some that just say, well, the midterms, or I think when we ground it in reality of what's at stake here and why whether we're aspiring to or striving to be generous leaders or follow the generous leaders and find them, the importance of the moment. So I think that grounds us, and I think that helps us understand what's at stake without getting too much into politics tonight. I said one final question, but I'll give you room for comment.
No, I was just going to say, I think, because it doesn't matter which way you voted, I don't think people want someone to feel like they have to leave this country.
Couldn't agree
more. They're
more.
Scared. I don't, even if you're the most diehard one side or the other, I can't believe that about our country,
And that's the critical word, our country.
Yeah.
It's not their country or my country or just it's ours, all of ours. I said one final question. You brought up in your opening remarks this idea of a routine and reflection. You have your own daily reflection routine that you walk through. I want you to talk to us about that. But before you do, folks, I'm going to ask you to hold your applause until the end. First, we will clap and we will applaud and we will celebrate tonight as we talked about generous leadership and the positivity in good ways to aspire to be better and to help others around us become better versions of themselves. You can get a copy of this book, and if you have a copy of this book already, you can get it signed. That's happening immediately after this in
This guy's
Walden.
salesman or what? Oh, he is? This is normal?
It's look, Here's the secret, Joe. I don't bring people here that have written bad books.
You're
I'm
so
not
kind.
I don't get excited about bad books. I get excited about good books, and this is a darn
kind.
good book. So
Well,
I
thank
can't
you.
recommend it enough. And so we're going to do that in Waldron 219 immediately following that. Another good book that is being presented tomorrow is Superabundance. Marion Tupy, a senior fellow at Cato, is going to talk to us about the conventional argument, right, is we are on a finite planet, and the more of us there are, the fewer resources we'll have. His research bears out that it's actually the opposite. The greater the population grows, the more resources we have, the more we can actually create things. Whether or not we'll believe that argument, I don't know. We can talk about it at the end of his presentation that's happening tomorrow at 7:30 at the Jefferson Educational Society. And we are back here in the Yale Ballroom on Monday, Veterans Day, November 11th, to again talk about leading and succeeding and lifting up future generations. A panel led by Major General Ed Bolton, retired. His sister, Dr. Karen Bolton, is going to be joining 2 other experts. Then we have 3 other programs happening, including we will talk about the election. Media experts are coming in on Thursday. We will get to that. But let's get back to that final question. Your routine, the importance of having a routine, something that guides you in good times and bad, helps you focus, keeps you on track. Joe, tell us about your routine.
Well, okay. I mean, I think I understand your question, but I mean, a couple things for me. One of the things that keeps me on track, focus, et cetera, is I'm just a big runner. I believe in exercise, and I try not to miss many days. It's very calming, et cetera. The other thing, for me, I've gone to, I think, 3 of these 10-day Vipassana. Any of you have heard of Vipassana? Silent meditation retreats, which is quite intense, 4:30 till 9:30. You don't talk at all, but they don't tell you it's Buddhist principles, but it is. But it's really just all about, reflection and understanding. It ain't about you. It's you're living in a moment, and what happened yesterday is already gone. Maybe not. That doesn't tell me. So I think that, that I as far as my reflection to keep myself focused, etc., exercise, running, if that's what you mean, and I still try to meditate as much as I can. Not as perfect as I should be, but
All is striving to be better, all is striving for that perfection. The author of The Generous Leader, Mr. Joe Davis. A round of applause for joining us for the Global Summit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Folks, thank you for coming out tonight. We will see you over at the book signing. Good night.